Good evening, everyone. You're in the right place at the right time. This is Coast to Coast AM, blasting out of the Mojave Desert like a Scirocco, blazing across the land, slamming into your radio like a supercharged nanoparticle of unobtainium. Greetings from the boldest, bawdiest, most outrageous city in the world, the planetary capital of sun, fun, sin, sex, and secrets. My not-so-humble hometown, Las Vegas, Nevada. My name is George Knapp, your occasional host, designated driver of the airwaves and moderator of tonight's upcoming cacophonous cavalcade of conversation. What's shaking out there? We've got a whopper in store for you tonight. Two great guests, profound subjects, plenty of amazing insights that should get your brain cells percolating and hopefully get you to come up with your own provocative questions and comments for our guests in both halves of tonight's discussion. Perhaps you're among the millions of news consumers who absorbed some of that perplexing announcement and the Q&A session unleashed by NASA earlier this week, wherein they announced preliminary findings from NASA's brief effort to dip its toes into UFO waters. Suffice to say, it left a lot to be desired. More on that in a moment. I wonder what renowned Harvard astronomer Dr. Avi Loeb might make of NASA's announcement and UAP investigation efforts so far by the world's leading space agency. Dr. Loeb, as you might know, courageously entered the ET debate a few years ago with his bold proclamations about our solar system's first confirmed interstellar visitor, a giant cigar-shaped object named Oumuamua. Since coming forward with his hypothesis, Dr. Loeb jumped into the larger arena with both feet, helped to co-found something called the Galileo Project, which has attracted some of the brightest minds in the world, the brightest scientists and academics, people who have ignored the ridicule and dismissiveness of some of their colleagues and have declared we need to get our heads around the possibility of ET life, both the possibility that it has already visited us and the notion that it is out there somewhere. Human survival might depend on it. Dr. Loeb has a brilliant new endeavor. It's called Interstellar, the search for extraterrestrial life and our future in the stars. It's inspirational stuff, and we're thrilled that he's agreed to join us for 2 full hours tonight, coming up in the second half. Big issues, big questions, as big as they get. Can't wait. First, though, we're joined by one of our favorite guests, the prolific writer and intrepid investigator Nick Redfern, who always surprises us with unique viewpoints on the weird world of what some call the paranormal or supernatural. This time, Nick takes a plunge into somewhat familiar territory, Mothman, a mystery that he has pursued for many years, across much of his life, in fact. But this time he expands the discussion to include other mysterious creatures, things that flap their wings in the night, flying cryptids that may or may not be connected. Nick is here a few minutes from now, and we'll jump right into it. Webmaster Lex Lonehood and I have pulled together our usual assortment of items and oddities culled from news media around the world. We call it Knapp's News. You can find it on the Coast to Coast AM website. Among the stories there tonight, I mentioned about the NASA announcement this week. Those who had their hopes up that NASA would take an actual deep dive into the UFO UAP mystery are sorely disappointed by what was overheard at this news event. NASA leaders seem to walk back some of the encouraging statements that they made just a couple of months ago, how they really wanted to investigate this matter, try to get some answers. And this time, though, we heard them say, we don't know what UAP are, but we're for sure they're not extraterrestrial. There's no evidence of that. And in almost the same breath, they promised total transparency moving forward, except they refused to give the name of the person they'd appointed to be head of this study going forward. It's secret. They wouldn't give it up. The name was finally released hours later in response to a public uproar, but sort of the die was cast, I'd say. The bloody fingerprints are there visible on the wall. What an awkward unveiling that was. But look, maybe you'll see it differently. We have a news piece that includes an interview with the chairman of this committee that produced the NASA report. Take a look. Tell me what your take is. Also there, a story from Capitol Hill about current political intrigue surrounding future UAP hearings. Congress members who want to have it run into serious opposition by a few ranking members of the House. The Intelligence Committee chairman in particular, who does not want any more hearings, doesn't want to see a special select committee created either, wants to stop UFO inquiries in their tracks right now. Check that out. There's an unfortunate science news story how the U.S. government has slashed all research into Antarctica at a time when you'd think we'd like to know what's happening down there at the bottom of the world, the changes that are underway. There's a news piece about the increasing likelihood of rolling blackouts and failures of the electric grid. What's the cause of that? And a treatise about near-death experiences. It's a good read. Those stories and more in Knapp's News. And while you're on the website, check out how to become a Coast Insider. The cost is about 15 cents a day if you subscribe for a year. Gives you access to a huge archive of programs and interviews, including the Art Bell Vault classics, all of them. You can listen anytime you want, as often as you want, on just about any device. It's a great deal. So, too, is a subscription to Beyond Belief. That's George Norrie's television program, wherein George interviews fascinating guests about thought-provoking topics, similar to what he does so well here on the radio. With that, let's assume the position. Bring in the dog and the cat and your mini Mothman. Put on a pot of joe. Slide your bod into the silky jammies and your toes into your best bunny slippers. Plop yourself down in a comfy spot, turn down the lights, and turn up the radio, because we're about ready to rumble. In a moment, Nick Redfern is here, Mothman and other flying monsters. I'm George Knapp, and this is Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. I don't want to lay it on too thick, but I wasn't kidding when I said that Nick Redfern is one of my favorite guests, because he's not only thorough and prolific, but also somewhat unpredictable. I mean, he's written about 80 books about paranormal, supernatural, weird, wondrous topics, creatures and entities and UFOs, for example. But you can never assume that he buys into all of it just because he's written about it. He often surprises us by taking a view opposite of what we might expect. He is British, but lives in Texas these days, has for a long time, has written extensively about UFOs, cryptozoology, the paranormal, conspiracy theories. He's regularly published in a number of publications and magazines, including Fate, Mysterious Universe. And if he were to tell me he's written another book by the time this program ends, I would not be surprised. His latest publication is Mothman and Other Flying Monsters, with the subtitle Nuclear Nightmares and Armageddon, which provides us kind of a hint about where this conversation is headed tonight. Nick, welcome back. Always great to have you here.
Hey, George. How's it going?
Pretty good. So this new book, here's my impression. It's maybe the most personal of your books that I have read. I mean, Mothman, as we learn in this, is kind of your gateway drug to the world of paranormal weirdness. I mean, you've touched on it at multiple points in your life. Share with us where it starts for you and why it was so formative in what happened in your life and the course you've taken.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these situations, where you can come up with some fantastic stories, and certainly from my hand, shall we say, much of it relates to Mothman. And Mothman really hasn't gone. I mean, the whole thing actually began in 1966, November the 12th, 1966, was the first encounter, actually in a little town called Clendenin, just outside, out of where all the main encounters began back in 1967. And the whole story is fascinating because the Mothman, whatever it really was, or they are, I should say, it's a fascinating story because nobody had seen anything like this before. And Mothman, from there, went from 1966 right through to the present time now. However, in the last 18 months, there's been some stranges in the stories about Mothman, and they're very disturbing. I'll give you an example. For the last sort of 15 months, something like that, I've been getting messages from people talking to me about how they've been having nightmares about Mothman. Literally Mothman nightmares. And people have been living, sort of just sitting around, then going to bed, and then they're having these bizarre dreams of nuclear war, and with the Mothman sort of flying in the sky above. Now, what makes this disturbing is that most of the people are having absolutely identical images, and that's not what you normally see. But I think the number of people I've spoken to now is somewhere in the region of about 41 people I've interviewed who've got these nightmares, which are very, very similar to each other. And most of the people talk about the sort of the classic mushroom cloud in the sky, nuclear war, nuclear nightmares, and when you think about this, why are we seeing this now? You know, does this mean there's sort of something like a nuclear war coming along, or is there another reason? We really don't know. But what we can say is that in the same way that there were prophecies way back in 1966 and 1967, when the original Mothman popped up, what we're seeing now is something just about the same. And so the question is this the start of other prophecies, but this time with respect to Mothman, in the situation, if you like, of almost of a nuclear war. Now, I'm not saying we're going to have a nuclear war, but what I am saying is that there are dozens of people now seeing these images in their in their nightmares. So something is happening, and the big question is, what is it that is actually happening, and why is this happening?
Viewing this from like 20,000 feet, the Mothman legacy, the Mothman prophecies, the original version of the story, a lot of people, after Keel's book came out and the stories that erupted in Point Pleasant, there was a disaster there. A lot of people died. There are those who thought for a while Mothman caused it, and then eventually over time people have considered that maybe Mothman was a harbinger of something bad that was happening. And thus, when people are seeing Mothmen all over the world or something like it now, along with dreams of nuclear disaster, the thought is that maybe it's a harbinger of bad things to come, not that Mothmen or those kind of creatures would cause it, right?
Yeah, that's what a lot of people think. You know, you see the Mothman and there's going to be bad things. That's basically what it comes to. But now that has started again now with these nuclear nightmares, as I call them, and why this should be happening right now. Well, one of the things I can tell you is that this actually started like this in 2016 and 2017, when there were a lot of Mothman encounters in Chicago and around Chicago, and those encounters and those nightmares carried on for about 5 or 6 weeks, and that suddenly broke up. But in those nightmares, they were exactly the same as well. We had these mushroom clouds, scenes, the site, if you like, of what looks like a nuclear war. And so when these cases first came out, I wondered, wow, you know, this is intriguing, but it's different. It's really different. You know, when we're talking about are we sort of on the head of a nuclear war? But if not, why is it that everybody's encounter is different? And this went down after about between 2013 and 2014, And at 2014, one of the things I found was that once again we were seeing cases of people seeing in their bed at night these horrific images of nuclear war. And I could go on and on, but the number of cases now, it's huge. And so my thought is to sort of just go and look at the stories and see what's happening, where's this happening. And for the most part, it's happening in the United States. Mm. And as far as other encounters, a lot of them have been reported in the UK. And funnily enough, this is a bit disturbing as well. People have been talking about North Korea in their dreams as well. Now, some people might say, well, this is just people just worrying, that we might have a nuclear war one day. Or does it mean that with Mothman coming down as a harbinger, is it something like that? Mm. Now, we could go along on this line and really tell people that we're doomed, are we doomed or aren't we doomed, or is it just just our minds that are just sort of worrying about things, or could it be a blend of two?
Yeah. I really enjoyed the connection between various monster movies and the formation of young Nick Redfern. So you start with some very personal stories about the Blood Beast Terror, and that sort of made an impression on your young mind. Tell us about that movie and where it led.
Yeah, this is really weird. Back in the 1960s, there was a movie called Blood Beast Terror, and it was an English movie, and it's actually a pretty good movie. And but what's fascinating about it is the fact that the story talks about it's set in the 19th century, and basically what it is, it's a giant moth with red eyes, which goes around killing people in this little village in England. Now, bear in mind, this was the same time, just about the same time, when the real Mothman started to come out of the atmosphere, if you like. It makes me wonder if we're dealing with something like tulpas and thought forms. The idea, because we're starting to think about these creatures and also the ones in the movie as well, it makes me wonder if, fiction is coming to reality,
Yeah. So this is a Hammer Films. I loved that stuff as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
I loved those movies. This has Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, two classic guys for those kind of films. It comes out, it's made in 1967. So the chances that the producers of that film, the guys who wrote it, had already heard about Point Pleasant and the Mothman events in the U.S., that seems kind of slim. Right?
It's really strange. And but that kind of stuff does happen now and again. In a similar way, you've got other situations when that kind of thing happens. It's almost as if fiction becomes reality, and I think that's what happened with the movie as well. I think the whole two came together, they blended, and that kind of thing. What really sort of amazed me is that most people have never really heard of the movie at all, the Blood Beast Terror.
Well,
most people never seen it or heard
people are
of
going
it.
to have to look for it now. They're going to have to call it up or see if there's a DVD around or something, just so they can keep up with us on this conversation. But that movie is not the only connection that that you make on a personal level as a youngster and a young man, and we're going to get into that in a moment here. We're talking with Nick Redfern about Mothman and Other Flying Monsters, his latest book. We're talking with Nick Redfern about Mothman and Other Flying Monsters. There are several other cases very similar to the Mothman story that have intervened throughout Nick's life. We're going to get into a couple of those examples, including the story of a large malicious aviator, this winged beast that raised hell in an area right in his hometown in the UK. We'll be right back with that story. So, Nick Redfern, we're talking about some of the stories and events that sort of imprinted on your brain as a youngster growing up. And one of them comes from the area where you lived growing up, a small village in the UK called Pelsall, and a story about a large malicious aviator, in quotes, that involves Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Go ahead and tell us that.
Yeah, it's really weird how things like that happen. But I've found personally that when I sort of get into investigate various cases of Mothman, strange, weird things happen, and that goes on and on. For example, some of these cases, a lot of people think there's just one thing, a Mothman. I actually don't think that is the answer. I think we're looking at multiple different types of creatures that are pretty much like Mothman, but they're slightly different. For example, there's one from the 1950s known as the Houston Batman down in Houston, Texas. This was early 1950s. This creature, the Houston Batman, that was seen flying around for many weeks, and that looked pretty much just like Mothman, a humanoid form and red eyes, glowing red eyes, and there's also one in the UK which has the name of the Owl Man, and funnily enough, that one has red eyes as well. And a friend of mine, John Downs, who did a lot of investigations into the story of the Owlman, when John started to investigate this case, everything went wrong for him, and again, so you have this like negativity.
But everything like what? You have a list in the book, like all kinds of things went wrong, right?
Yeah,
and his cars broke down. His pets died. His wife left him. He lost his job. On and on and on. It just everything bad that he could imagine happened as he's trying to dig into this.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I sort of take it careful, at least, when you're dealing with these entities. But you can look at it from the perspective that there's multiple Mothman creatures, or maybe we are just sort of looking at one. I'm not really sure, but all I can say for sure is that this creature or these creatures, they're around all over the place, and it's not a good thing to be by them either. So,
this one that you write about in this book near Pelsall, this town where you grew up, small picturesque village in central England, and the story that is told it goes way back, I guess, about this. I guess a guy was put away for killing a bunch of horses, and then he got sprung because, as you write, Arthur Conan Doyle sort of helped him, helped show that he wasn't responsible, that these animal deaths kept happening, caused by, according to witnesses, a huge winged beast or bird of prey. Can you fill in some details?
Yeah. Well, I lived in this little village in central England, and typical one. kind of like you would see in those TV shows like Midsummer Murders. These really little villages and towns. And what I found was that when anything weird in the area happened, it seemed to it was like a magnet. It sort of pulled it to me, and I found that I was sort of brought to these things. And there was this, and in this little village that I lived in, there was a story of this giant flying creature soaring across the village. And most people didn't know about that at all. You really had to dig up for that story because eventually it sort of just, went away. But to keep on sort of being pushed into this issue of flying humanoids, which is basically how it worked, it's so weird, that this keeps happening and still goes on.
You don't think that of these as flesh and blood animals, an undiscovered species that's just been hiding from humanity? This is something else, right?
Sorry, say that again?
You don't think of these as flesh and blood animals, like an undiscovered species, like some version of Bigfoot might be. These are something else, not animals that are just not yet discovered by humans.
Well, it's difficult to know, really. I think we also have to sort of figure out if they are actually flesh and blood, or are they something that's more of a, sort of a paranormal type creature. It's hard to say, and when you look at when the Mothman story began, there were sort of questions about, are these things real? Are they solid? Are they creatures? Or are they something for more like sort of a spectral creature? Some people go with one side, some people go the other side. But for the most part, people see them in the field of cryptozoology, the study of unknown animals. But I'm not quite sure Mothman, should really be put into the cryptozoology category. I think it should perhaps be in possibly even like a ghostly angle, if you like.
Well, a lot of the examples you have of Owlman and Bat Squatch and other things that we'll talk about, it seems like they are harbingers, and when people see them, they encounter strings of bad luck, bad things happen to them. It's as if something attaches itself to them, which reminds me of some poltergeist stories, ghost hunters who are investigating a haunted house, they bring something home with them, also reminiscent of Skinwalker Ranch. People have gone there. Investigators for the U.S. government have gone there, have experienced strange things. They go home thousands of miles away, and it comes with them, and it stays there. I don't know. Some people call that hitchhikers, attachments. Have you dug into that?
Not too much, no. But but there's. What's fascinating is the way in which all these creatures, you can really sort of dig into all of these and still really not have all the answers. But certainly one of the most intriguing one, for me at least, was when with John Downs, who we mentioned earlier, I went with him to Puerto Rico on a TV shoot back in 2014. And what was fascinating, that a lot of the people we interviewed on the island of Puerto Rico, they told us, the people who lived there said that they'd seen these sort of strange creatures, humanoid, wings like bats, and red eyes. And in the book, the witness to one of these encounters Her name was Norca, and she told me what this looked like, and she made a picture of it, and I was like, wow, well, this is Mothman, you know, and I didn't even realize, even on Puerto Rico, that there was something like that even in Puerto Rico, but it looked just in her artwork, it looked like Mothman. So there's, you know, you can find these things all over the place, and but I do think there's an angle of paranormal tied with something that is partly sort of not quite normal, shall we say, or humanoid. At least it's something, you know, it's something alive, but from my perspective, it's what's alive, you know. We don't really know. So
You've returned to the scene of the crime, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, many times to speak at conferences and events there, Mothman festivals, things of that sort. I mean, you know, at one point, as you and I have discussed before, that the town really wasn't comfortable in talking about it because there was a tragedy associated with it. How do they see it now?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they've embraced it to some degree. They have a festival, but I would imagine there are people living there that are still very upset about the whole thing, given their loved ones were lost in that when this bridge collapsed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's two ways to look at it, really, George. One of them is the fact that, you know, in 1967, when there was the huge disaster at Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and dozens of people drowned in the town, and that was seen to be the work of Mothman. But today, now, the event, if you like, well, not so much the event, but every year there's like a thing put on, you know, like people come to, literally about 1,000 people come to Point Pleasant, and you know there's food and there's music, and people are running around and having a good time, and there's music and all sorts of different things, and so now the Point Pleasant, although they had this terrible disaster in 1967, today it's more for sort of like a town time, you know, like a place for you know, going all over the place, you know. We're talking about like you know, the town fair, that kind of thing.
Yeah. A lot of what is kind of chilling about Mothman is that, you know, still there are aspects of it that scare the heck out of people. The Men in Black, how they fit into this story. You tell about this friend of yours that you meet, Susan, whose writings you share in the book, her ongoing encounters with strangeness, and how the Men in Black showed up at her house, I guess, one day. Can you fill us in on who she was, what became of her, and how the Men in Black might fit into the larger Mothman story?
Yeah, this was a friend of mine, Susan Shepherd, but sadly she died. But for many years, she'd been doing work into the whole angle around Point Pleasant. You know, she was looking into Mothman, UFOs, aliens, and the creepy character Indrid Cold, and she did a huge amount of work, and as a result of that, she was having all sorts of weird phone calls, and on certain times, Susan actually thought that these calls were literally coming from aliens, and she thought it could be, or she suspected it could have been the Men in Black as well, because when the Mothman first arrived, that was the only strange thing in the town. But it wasn't long before the Men in Black suddenly appeared. Now, they were not the Men in Black that we see, in the movies. These looked like, grim monsters. Their skin was sort of like grey and white, and they had the bulging eyes, which they would hide with wraparound sunglasses, and their skin looked sort of plastic. And in all honesty, they didn't even seem to appear to be human. So again, Point Pleasant for years was covered with weirdness.
Now, what are those, Nick? You have any idea how do they fit into the picture? Why do they show up in the same town that's plagued by Mothman, and they knock on the door, they speak, they pester people, they intimidate people, right? They've told people to shut up, don't talk about this UFO case, don't. I'm correct, right? You are right, and the whole area, it's never lost that sort of atmosphere. But I mean, it is a good thing that the whole thing is sort of today, at least, the town now sort of looks at things from a positive angle and not the negative side of it. Well, you tell the story in the book about, it's in Susan's words, your friend Susan, who's gone now, but she's sleeping upstairs, and these two strange characters knock on the door with the sunglasses and the dark suits, and there is Susan here, and her sister answers, and no, she's upstairs sleeping, and they kind of look at each other weirdly, and there's two more of them out on the street waiting for them. So there's like four of them that showed up, and they couldn't seem to comprehend what it meant that she was sleeping. And then they said, "We'll be back," without saying who they were, which is pretty strange.
Yeah, you're right. It is. But I mean, Susan had so many experiences over the years, and she was someone who really dug into things properly, and I think that is one of the key reasons why these entities, if you like, terrorized her, because they realized that she was really getting into all these different phenomena, and I think that may have had some sort of connection as well.
We're talking with Nick Redfern about Mothman and other flying monsters, nuclear nightmares, and Armageddon. In the next segment, I want to get into how seriously we should take some of these warnings and strange dreams about nuclear destruction. A couple of weeks ago when I was here before, we did a show about Calvin Parker. We heard excerpts from an earlier interview I'd done with him. He wasn't available to talk to us because it was in ill health. As we now know, the Pascagoula incident, which Calvin made famous, the book that was out, Calvin Parker passed away a few weeks ago. Same day that the public learned about Calvin's passing, that's when Jimmy Buffett died. And Jimmy Buffett, if you don't know, was born in Pascagoula, maybe the most famous person to ever come from that town.